women voices, and it was all about kind of working class filmmakers. So anyone who's been with us all day, working class filmmakers. And the segment before we talked about, getting into the industry and those barriers that can exist. I think some barriers can be within you. I know personally, I've held myself back for years, just through confidence. But then also sometimes, even when you do try, those barriers are there. So I'm sure for the Whitley community, having that experience is really tough. I should be using my mic, I should say, actually. Just realised that. There you go.
Thank you.
And I think it's really interesting. My husband Matt will know that every time we drive past Chinfield Studios, I give a little squeal of delight. It's quite sad, it's quite nerdy. Having grown up in Reading and never always loved film, and then as I got older wanting to work in film, but never having that opportunity. And I've been lucky enough to work from there for a while, which was great, but it is still feeling very closed, so it would be nice to explore a bit of that in this segment. But do you want to introduce yourself fully and your rather long title at the university, just so I don't get it wrong? I think it's better if you do that.
Yeah, absolutely. So that long title, by the way, is just one of the things I do, so it's going to go on for a while. I'm Shweta Ghosh. I have been a filmmaker for, I think, since 2012. We'll do the math now. I've been working at the university as lecturer in screen practices and industries since 2019. And I specialize in sort of documentary filmmaking, but also working with marginalized communities through my research. I've made a couple of sort of feature documentaries before, and worked on a bunch of different commercial and client projects while I was in India as well as here. I think it's this film. I don't know if we want to do an intro of the film just yet, but it's worth noting in the introduction itself that I'm here representing the filmmakers and the community as opposed to sort of just speaking about the project from my perspective. I think that's the tiny nutshell bit. I can share more as we go along.
Well, I think it'd be interesting to introduce, talk a little bit about why the film was made. Longer than some of the other films that we've seen today, but kind of why it was made and why it mattered to get so many different voices sharing. I think the lady, is it Lynn, who's kind of on the street and they talk to her?
Yeah.
Name Lynn?
Yeah.
He was so enthusiastic. But actually, if you're going to make a film about an area, it should represent that area. So if you could share a bit of that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, the project was called Futures in Film, so that's what the film is also called. And the idea was to understand that, like you've said, the studios exist, the studios are there at our doorstep, but how do you get in? What is this information that I need to be able to make those connections, right? And it feels hard enough to sit outside, even in this cinema, to think about those things. But when you're looking at it from the perspective of a community that has not had access to education and employment opportunities over generations, it doesn't even feel like an option. So I think that's why we wanted to start with the project, to actually ask, what do you know about this, let alone what do you feel about the barriers, right? So I think the first question that we set out to answer was, what is the level of awareness, which is why we needed to speak to so many people. And most of them haven't necessarily made it into the film. Once we knew the level of awareness, we wanted to know what it is that people were thinking about as the barriers, but not just talk about or stop at barriers, but to think about what it means to go beyond that. And the university, I think, is in a very strong position to do that. And in all the possible Robin Hood terms, you want to make sure that any resources you have, you are able to share in whatever capacity within the constraints that one can. You want to share it with communities that don't quite have access to those resources. So I think information in this case was the largest resource that we could share, and practicing filmmaking was the largest resource we could share. And so that's why it wasn't just me as, representative of the university. I had two lovely students on board this project as well. Kyle Johnson, who worked with the younger cohort, and Rinal Rajiv, who worked with the sort of older cohort, or the Whitley researchers.
Yeah.
And it's worth saying that the project was actually tapping into... So Whitley has had a long history of a wonderful initiative called the Whitley Researchers, which is basically, it was set up as people who know how to do community-based research and are from the community or have good links with the community. So the Whitley Community Development Association, which is based at the South Reading Community Hub, they sort of have, had a long history of kind of training these Whitley researchers in partnership with the university. But what they hadn't done was use video or film as a part of the research methods. So that's where we came in with this project to kind of differentiate and add on to that skill set in many ways. And I think there's so much power and potential. I mean, if there are any, I'm sure there's like a bunch of filmmakers here. I think what excites me the most about filmmaking is the fact that it enthuses others when we see it in action, when we do it, when we observe that process. I think there's something so exciting and something that draws you in to a point where it wants to make you do it. So I think it wasn't just about understanding how many people knew about the studios or how many people had even dabbled in filmmaking. It was seeing that process of filmmaking unfold in front of their eyes. And that's what got Lynn so excited to share her experience. Right? Yeah. So it became like a talk of, just different people who would come in and, go out of the cafe. And they'd be like, oh, are you doing that same film right now? And because it was the two community filmmakers who made the film, it felt more achievable. So instead of a crew swooping in, they've been on BBC, they've been on ITV News in many shapes and forms. They don't always agree with the representation, but I think having someone from the community ask questions made probably the biggest difference. So it wasn't just about what we learned at the end of the project. It was the very act of filmmaking itself, which was, creating that sense of impact, I think. And I would always say we need more and more of that, because that's what will get us excited across the region about filmmaking.
Right, fantastic. By the way, I will be coming to the audience as well, so if you've got any questions about community filmmaking, it'd be great to hear them. But it's something that we've sort of touched on. It's a project I'm going to be working on myself, about sort of barriers to entry. I know as a black woman, when I started doing this, or when I've worked on any films, I'm more often, if not one of two, the only black person on set and the only black woman on set. And I'm really lucky that I grew up with parents who were kind of like, well, you can be in any space you want to be as long as you've got manners and you show up correctly in terms of getting on with people, just do it. But there can be that kind of feeling of being uncomfortable. And if you add the intersectionality to that of, being from a working class family, which I am, having those barriers, it is challenging. And I think it's also useful to say that, it's not the studio that hires, it's the production company. And that in itself is really important. And I think a small bugbear of mine is when the studio was being built, there was talk of, there's going to be all these jobs. And yes, there will be jobs, but it's going to be contract and freelancing work. So was there any kind of discussion around people understanding the type of work and the type of contract? Because there is work, but it is contract work, which you might not be used to.
Oh, that's an interesting question. So I think we didn't quite get to that much detail, because I think it was all in very initial stages of awareness and excitement around filmmaking being an option. So I think we had a couple of filmmaking workshops where we discussed what it means like to be on set, which is why that insight about the bus running early enough but not early enough was an important one. So we did talk about the practicalities of getting on set and things like that, but I don't think we quite spoke about what it means to be employed in the industry. But I think some of the people picked up on the fact that they were already doubling up on multiple kind of roles, right? So they were like, I am a carpenter, I don't mind learning a little bit more or upskilling myself and learning about how to build a set, and then that transition is what I need help with. I'll figure out the rest. So I think there was more about what are the gaps in training, which became, discussed as the barriers more than sort of just the contractual elements, I think.
Oh, that's interesting, because I know the Lights Camera Business event was all about trying to help people understand the transferable skills. So if you're already a carpenter, an accountant, an electrician, and so on, there is a way to kind of transfer in. But just thinking about those who may have had sort of lower ways with their education and being able to navigate, how did that make them feel? Because, you've made this great film and the conversations have come up, But would you say in your opinion, they now feel that they can try and apply for a role if they see something come up or approach a production company?
No, I don't think I would. And in all honesty, I think it's important that we say that one film can't make a difference to the entire thing. But a conversation here, this film going to multiple places to start those conversations is going to help. One thing worth bearing in mind is that this project was sort of done in 2023. The lights, camera, business event, for example, was more recent. So a lot of the things that we could have linked up to didn't quite exist at that point.
Right. Okay.
Or they were in initial stages. So Screen Berkshire, which is the sort of British Film Institute funded partnership that, the university is part of, that is led by Resource Productions in Slough, that Shinfield Studios is part of. There's been a lot of activity that has happened. Since this project, there's been a lot of connection from my end of any boot camp, any training opportunities have been sent to the community representative who unfortunately couldn't be here today. But that thing about the community industry liaison officer that was mentioned as one of the community-based solutions, that is actually, I think, where the work is at.
Right.
There was one failed funding opportunity, which I will be kind of doing again, but I think that is where the work will be, to connect up someone who knows the jobs and the types of jobs, the types of training that are happening at a Screen Berkshire level or in a university or, and connect that up to each and every community. So we're looking at this being replicated as something that is a person who engages, who's from the community, who knows what they need, and who people will feel comfortable to approach. And they are the person that then takes those queries and, concerns to anyone who is in a production company. Because I think the translation is where the problem lies.
Right, okay.
And I don't think it will be a quick fix for us to make that confidence develop to a point where we can approach, have people from the community approach production companies directly.
Okay.
We're not at that place yet, I feel.
Right.
But I think if we have that sort of person to do the translation from industry to community and community to industry in multiple centers, then we've got something there which can help people feel supported, but also get the right information at the right time.
And I think as well as, I know there are independent filmmakers in the room, it's looking at your crew. Most films, as you know as a filmmaker, you do sort of take your crew, your gang from one film onto the next, but there's something to be said for looking at how can I engage more people? How can I work with somebody else? How can I do more shadowing? I know when I crewed up for Words on a Page, it was really important to me